the calm before the storm.
Good evening and welcome very much to Conversations, where I'm pleased to welcome to the program Ambassador Anbari. He is, of course, the ambassador to the United Nations from the country of Iraq. And Ambassador, welcome very much to Conversations.
My pleasure.
I wonder if I might ask you, this is December 13, 1990. All kinds of ultimatums have been issued and so forth, as everyone is aware. Your own background, your own personal feeling about the events that transpired after August 2nd. Were you, your country, the people of your country, surprised by the reaction of the United States government that they've taken and the extreme measures that they've taken in reaction to the events that followed August 2nd?
Well, in a sense, yes. First, because up till then, we were on good term and good relationship with the United States. And frankly, I myself was so surprised that a superpower such as the United States could launch such a major military built up on pure sort of fabricated lies, namely that Iraq was threatening Saudi Arabia. We tried to convince the American as well as everyone else that really we had no intention whatsoever. It is against our policy, against our interest to invade another Arab country such as Saudi Arabia. But the United States went ahead and sent some, its troops to Saudi Arabia, repeating so many times that they were only for defense of Saudi Arabia. As far as Kuwait was concerned, they said that, well, it is for the Security Council sanctions to solve the problem. But on November 8th, as you know, the American administration reversed its position and said, now from now on, we will be on the offensive as well. Of course, such an act is considered under the UN Charter as an act of aggression.
They were taking a number of acts of aggression in advance of the UN resolution.
Indeed.
The blockade itself
indeed.
Was enacted before there was UN
Sure.
approval.
And they had to solicit a resolution from Security Council to provide sort of a fig leaf, a legal fig leaf to justify the American action. But as you know, under international law, under the UN Charter, it's not only the use of force is prohibited and considered as an act of aggression, but also the threat to use force is an act of aggression. And the United States has been threatening a small country such as my own, Iraq, since November 8th that they would invade or they would destroy the country.
Yeah, absolutely, with a tremendous firepower, and they've just been putting it over there more and more, that kind of thing. And of course, the relationship between Iraq, without going into great detail, a relationship of Iraq and Kuwait has been throughout the century. Practically, the question of Kuwait has been one where there was dispute about the Kuwait, and that the Iraqi claim to Kuwait has been a long-standing one. Saudi Arabia was an entirely different proposition. They could have come in from any direction if that was their intent, and they had that. They did not have that intent. There's no reason to think that they did have that intent.
We could easily have moved into Saudi Arabia or into the United Arab Emirates or whatsoever, but it's against our policy. It's against our interest. And again, we consider Saudi Arabia as a brotherly country, and we had a pact of non-aggression between Iraq and Saudi Arabia, which the Kuwaitis, by the way, refused to sign at the time. We have no border problem with Saudi Arabia. We have signed the agreement fixing the border between Iraq and Saudi Arabia. But as I mentioned, we know that was a pure lie, as simple as that, on the part of the U.S. administration, claiming or accusing Iraq that was about to attack Saudi Arabia.
You mean right after August 2nd even?
Yes.
Yeah. And do you think they intended to move toward an offensive build-up?
In order to somehow convince the American public opinion, world public opinion, that they were there to defend the country and they were purely for defensive purposes. But once they achieved their objective, namely to have enough military forces built up in Saudi Arabia, they said, well, okay, from now on, we are on the offensive course.
Yeah.
But who authorized the United States of America? Neither God nor the Security Council nor anyone to assume offensive purposes.
Yeah, and particularly to act in such a, what is really it's almost a unilateral kind of way that they've been acting, and they're carrying it, even though they have some people who have built a very, very shaky coalition of people who've come to support that proposition that they're trying to make.
Well, we believe that it is against the interests of the United States. It's against the interests of the very people they claim to defend. And it is the only interest is Israel, namely to have the Iraqi industrial and military forces destroyed by America.
Yeah, not only the Iraqi industrial forces, but also the very fact that Iraq, we have here, I'd like to make it a point, again, the Human Development Report of the United Nations, which has just recently been reported, unbiased report, and it is interesting that in the area of education, infant mortality increases, the improvement of the relationship between men and women and so forth, there are indication after indication that put Iraq at the very top of the world in terms of progress, in terms of making progressive progress toward improving the status of the people of their country, which might spell well why there's great support for the leadership within Iraq itself. But also Iraq has been very much in the van of advancing education at a higher level, technical education, technical advancement, and they claim the right to be able to advance in terms of modern technology, science and technology, and not to be condemned for trying to bring themselves into the modern world and to be called and to have supercomputers or any other kind of technical advancement they want to make a possible threat and therefore be the object of an attack. That must ride very heavily in your, with you, that they try to say your country cannot be advancing technologically, just as a basic major premise.
Indeed. As a matter of fact, since you mentioned this report, UNESCO for a number of years had recognized that Iraq was almost the first country in the world in eradicating the illiteracy in Iraq among the adult. Plus, of course, as you said, the provision free of charge of health and education to every citizen in the cities as well as in small villages. However, apparently, both Israel and the United States would like to put a break on the rights of third world countries, definitely the Arab countries, and certainly Iraq, not to achieve any advancement or any progress in terms of technology, in terms of education, in terms of standard of living.
They want no threat to their own claim of hegemony, as it were, Western Eurocentral hegemony upon the world. And is the act of the United States, in your view, with compliant members even in the United Nations or compliant other other members, an assertion of the right of the United States to exert hegemony within the world? And this ought to be questioned by not only Iraq, but much of the third and developing world and other peoples of the world?
Indeed, as simple as that. And as a matter of fact, now the United States is forcing the rest of the world to implement its own policy through the Security Council, even though every country has been damaged, has been hurt badly, I would say, whether it's in Eastern Europe or in third world countries, not only because of the rise in oil prices, because of the sanction imposed on Iraq, but also because of the economic and trade boycott with Iraq. Yet the whole world now is really, in a way, acquiescing in this aggressive policy of the United States.
Almost
but I believe
quizzling.
eventually, they will be so hurt that will be either civil war, particularly in Eastern Europe and in African and Asian countries, or simply they would disobey the United States and go ahead with their relationship with Iraq.
Yeah, well, because it would be, and they're being hurt now by this, by these
it's
sanctions
too
that have
much.
been imposed by them, and this tremendous force buildup in the in Saudi Arabia. The superpower status of the United States, Trident submarines, stealth technology, the tremendous firepower that the United States does and has able to command, it must be in a certain sense difficult for the people of Iraq, which is a relatively smaller country, as far as we should keep this in mind, surrounded as it were and so forth. There must be tremendous pressures upon the people of Iraq and yourselves as you think in terms of the firepower and the directed gall, as it were, of the American administration now.
Well, you see, the United States, I believe, is trapping itself by having such a massive military built up in the Arabian deserts. As far as the Iraqis are concerned, we feel we are morally right, and as long as we are on defending our own country rather than attacking other countries, we feel that we are the more powerful. I believe the United States is the weaker there, not only because they are sort of launching an act of aggression against innocent people, children, men and women, civilian, as well as the Iraqi army, But I believe eventually the United States would be morally defeated, definitely. And I wonder whether we will be able to achieve any military victory there.
It'd be morally defeated as it was morally defeated in Vietnam on another occasion?
No, it's already, I think, the fact to build your foreign policy on fabricated lies, eventually, as it happened, as you know, with the claim about the Gulf of Tonkins, eventually it would be revealed that the United States was lying. I mean, was lying not only to the American people, but to the world at large. And I believe any administration that built its foreign policy on fabricated lies should be condemned.
Yeah, it should be condemned, and yet here all the world is putting the onus, or attempting to, as Mr. Reagan would say, putting all the onus upon your country, as it were.
No, I think every educated person, as we have seen in the hearings in the Senate, as well as in people who are really experienced enough, whether in military affairs or in political affairs, that Iraq, after all, offered to negotiate. And what's better than negotiation? And again, this is another bankruptcy, the moral bankruptcy of the American administration by refusing to negotiate.
Yeah, right. Well, it's beginning to be some possibility. There will be these meetings with Mr. Baker, Mr. Aziz, and so forth. Also, the idea that the United Nations could so vociferously support those resolutions that were passed against your country, and yet so cavalierly ignore other resolutions that have been passed by the Security Council, Palestine and others, right? Must give you a great deal of upset that they should be so selective in terms of those which they feel duty-bound to call to back up with such power.
Well, indeed,
it's a double standard.
It is the duplicity and the selectivity of the United States by ignoring almost 80 resolutions passed by the Security Council, asserting the rights of self-determination for the Palestinian people, asking Israel to withdraw from the occupied West Bank, Gaza Strip, and Golan Heights, and south of Lebanon, and yet the United States is not really pressing. To the contrary,
not at all.
Protecting Israel actually, and vetoing every resolution. As you know, for the last 2 months, the non-aligned group within the Security Council have been trying to formulate a very moderate, as a matter of fact, resolution to protect the Palestinian. And because of the American threats, American use of force, American pressure, the Security Council have been paralyzed and unable to pass such a resolution. This shows that really the United States is demeaning the Security Council and the United Nations at a time the whole world needs really the United Nations by simply trying to abuse its position of having a veto power within the Security Council, of reducing the Security Council into a department of the State Department.
Yeah, right. And they need be compliant and sycophant, as it were, to this large hegemonic rule. There are governments and there are people. The mass of the people, the mass of the Arab people, Mohammed Mehdi was here earlier today. His feeling is that among the mass of the Arab people, not only Arab but even broader Islamic and even third world peoples, that among the masses of the people, there's a great deal of support for Mr. Saddam Hussein.
Well, as a matter of fact,
that is not necessarily reflected by leaders who, in a certain sense, like labor leaders selling out to management, the rank and file in a certain sense. But do you understand what I'm saying? There's a great deal of support among the, let's say, the poorer peoples or the third world peoples of the world for this act of standing up to Western hegemony.
Actually, the poor as well as educated people. In every Arab country where there is a margin of freedom, you have the masses really demonstrating in every possible way, expressing their support to Iraq. But of course, in a regime where you have authoritarian sort of governments, the masses are really unable to do so. To us, really, it's simply indecent for one person, say, to accumulate 60 or 70 billion dollars while thousands of Arabs are living in tents and not having enough to eat. And now the whole really world is realizing this truth, and it is impossible, intolerable, and it's bound to change.
Yeah, we have the same thing in our own economy, if we may. 40% of all of our assets are owned by the upper 1%, and we allow people to sleep on the street. So the problem is endemic to the world, that the current leadership of much of this new world order that Mr. Bush would talk about would be putting in place a world order that doesn't have the means of achieving elemental justice for the less advantaged peoples of the world. If you understand what I'm saying.
Yes, indeed.
And well, it should not be supported by a great number of people of the world.
Indeed.
And yet governments compliant to that hegemony are going along with it now. Such a policy or such a situation cannot long stand.
I doubt very much.
In moral or in ethical and ultimately geopolitical and geostrategic terms.
I doubt very much. And we know that the destiny of every empire had been to disintegrate. And we are seeing really what's going on now in Eastern Europe and Soviet Union. And I believe the United States is risking eventual disintegration as well by trying to impose its global hegemony on the rest of the world.
Yeah.
First, there is no need for that. And secondly, simply, eventually, I believe the third world countries in particular, and Europe specifically, unfortunately, they are not being really aware of the far-reaching implication of the American policy in the Arabian Gulf now, because eventually it's going to be used against European and Japanese interests by the United States. But we feel that like any other empire or any other sort of power trying to dominate the rest of the world, it would fail.
Eventually it will fail, and perhaps in the minds of many, the sooner the better. The fall of the challenge, the dialectic challenge of the Soviet Union to the Western powers, the belt of Islamic concern, and within an Islamic and with a progressive and an Islamic context of the importance of equity that is endemic or is intrinsic to Islam, as it is well understood and practiced and not put over with a patina of monarchy assumptions by human beings and so forth. But there is a sense of equity there. It could well be that there is a green belt of opposition to this first world hegemony, North America, Europe, Japan, that could serve well, particularly the third world, and as a break, as it were, to the hegemony, that the challenge, as it were, to the first world hegemony is one that more and more people of the world might be able to understand is something that is not only necessary, but it is fully appropriate in order for us to begin to move into a just new world order rather than to an imperialistic, hegemonic new world order, if you can understand.
Well, I believe eventually the majority of the American people wouldn't tolerate such a sort of policy on the part of the United States. And definitely, of course, the European nations, I would say they are more enlightened, politically speaking, and they are more aware of the danger, whether to the environment, whether to world peace, or whether to the eventual destruction of our own Earth. They would not allow, I believe, the United States to continue such a policy. I am quite optimistic that eventually any American administration would have to listen to the sound of reason, which is expressed even now by the vast majority of American, whether military people or politicians or foreign diplomats and so on.
And also, as we get, as you've been able to see in our Senate hearings after November 8th, there's been some increased criticism. It was practically a completely compliant Congress that was going along with that, and it's now come in the hands, some of the senators are complaining, but it's in the hands of one man with a tremendous force of power that he has there to commit the United States nation, even though the nation might not, with no act of war or no declaration by Congress of a war, commit the nation to an act. Almost it's in his hands as much as Augustus Caesar.
I doubt very much really that eventually will do, because anyone who knows the region, and I'm sure the American administration has enough intelligence as well as well-known information, public information, that no war simply can be waged there without roasting every form of life there, including American soldiers, including the Arab population, including the any form of living, whether in the water or in the sky, because you have so many oil installations, so many petrochemical plants, so many oil fields, so many refineries, so many gas tanks, that any war simply would destroy everyone. And so it would be basically collective suicide. And I believe any decent, any sane person would not really risk such a war. This is why I believe it's basically intimidation. And simply the Iraqis would not be intimidated.
They've been intimidated in the past. They don't mean to be intimidated. And so this vision that they would want to put forth of a quote-unquote surgical ability for American air power to be able to just very, very quickly wipe Kuwait and the forces off the face of the map without suffering great losses and so forth is a pipe dream. And we must understand that despite the tremendous military capability of the United States, if there was an attack upon your country or upon your forces, there would be the ability of Iraq to retaliate in a way that could reach the oil fields of Saudi Arabia and other things, and they couldn't be corrupted, and the area would be incinerated.
I believe all
In
the
your view.
Arab sort of allies of America
Yeah.
would be the first victims of any act of aggression on the part of the United States. So it's self-defeating, both in terms directly as far as the United States is concerned and indirectly as far as the Arab allies of the United States are concerned. And secondly, as I mentioned at the beginning, Iraq had offered to negotiate everything with the United States or with any other interested party, and we made our initiative very clearly, repeatedly, August 12, saying that let us talk about implementing all the resolution of the Security Council in a fair and just manner to solve the problems of the Middle East once and for all. And in saying that, we also suggested that the Security Council itself should formulate uniform rules, taking into consideration, of course, the peculiarities of each problem, in order to ensure the withdrawal of foreign forces from the region. I don't know why the United States dismissed that case. Of course, I believe they did it so in order to cover up the double standard followed by the United States administration in defending Israel all the time, right or wrong, and abusing its veto power against the Arab nations.
As they've been doing over the years, and still maintain themselves as the largest scofflaw, and they've been attacking the United Nations over the longer haul as an instrument until they begin to be able to manipulate it for these purposes. It's hard to understand quite why such a development could have allowed to have been happening. Whose interest does it serve?
Well,
to have events as they are now.
Well, as you know, the recent sort of discussion within the Security Council concerning a resolution for the protection of the Palestinian in occupied Palestine, although the United States on many occasions expressed its willingness to go ahead with such a resolution, yet it had been vetoed by the United States, whether in the meeting of the Security Council in Geneva or here, and I believe it's simply Israel exercising a veto over the American foreign policy. It's as simple as that. Otherwise, I believe the basic American sense of fairness, basic American sort of ethics to give everyone, every country, its right to explain, to present its case, and to have its day at court, so to speak, simply should not allow really American administration to do so. Yet it seems to be for, as you know, political purposes, for some selfish interest, the Israelis have been able to veto any policy on the part of the United States that seeks even-handedness in the Middle East or equitable solution for the problem in the Middle East.
Yeah, and that must be something that's understood by all Arab peoples, because they feel a sense of double standard through the decades, as it were, as far as that is concerned. One wonders from the standpoint of an Arab person responsible for that, what do you feel is the thinking in the American administration that has so unalterably supported, as it were, Israel as their ally in the Middle East? Mr. Shamir is here in New York, in the United States now. He says there's commonality of democracy between the two, a word that has to be understood and defined.
Well, this is, of course,
and secondly, he said to bring stability and strategic security to the area. One wonders in what way have they brought stability or strategic security as far as the United States is concerned to the area? And I wonder if you could address yourself to his claim, moral claim, of there being a commonality of democratic association between the United States and the State of Israel.
Of course, all this nonsense of democracy in Israel, actually it is not true. It's another false claim on the part of Israel. It's only South Africa and Israel where you have racial discrimination as repugnant as you have in Israel, where you have all the Arab citizens are second-class citizens. You have a military sort of regime imposed on the Arab citizens, and it's the only country which is based really on race. No other religion, no other nationality really is tolerated in Israel. And even South Africa now is moving towards sort of democratization, genuine democratization, but not in Israel. And as you know, Mr. Shamir is he was a professional terrorist.
So he was a terrorist Stern gang. Yeah, he was a Stern gang leader.
And he's proud of his past. And now to claim that he is sort of a source of stability in the region, I believe, is simply it's untrue. All the problems in the Middle East, whether in Lebanon or all the wars that took place in the Middle East were caused by the Israeli policy, by Israelis' insistence to deny the rights of the Arabs to live in peace and to have self-determination, by Israelis' expansionist policy.
Yeah, yeah, and now there's more and more talk about expulsion into Jordan. They'd be tremendously destabilizing, trying to have Palestinians put into Jordan. The rift is becoming greater. So that underlying tension is there no matter what. The idea, the word is used, linkage and that sort of thing, but the idea of there being some sort of a regional comprehensive understanding, international peace conference, of course, is being brought up and so forth. This is an appropriate direction in your estimation for events to be moving as we begin to look into these crucial months and weeks ahead?
Well, we support any peaceful ways or means to settle the problems. I believe the Arab Summit in phase acknowledge the right of Israel or the right of all states in the region to have secure and safe borders and to implement the United Nations resolutions, to acknowledge the rights of the Palestinians to have self-determination and to have their own state and to coexist peacefully with the Israeli state. I believe these are sort of basic, decent sort of demands. None of them against Jewish people in Israel. And yet, because of the expansionist policy, you see, it is very clear that Mr. Shamir said it, that the immigration of the Soviet Jews would require bigger Israel. And what does this mean? It means that they have to expand more and more. It's not enough that they have been stealing Arab waters, whether it's Lebanese, Litani, or Jordanian River and the others, but depriving the Palestinians of their farms and their land. And perhaps the people don't know that they are not allowed. No Arab farmers is allowed to dig a well in order to find some water. But only the Israeli settlers are allowed to do that. But eventually, again, I don't think that there is a future for any small nation such as the Israelis to live forever in peace, surrounded by more than 200 Arabs and Muslims against the will and against the interests of the majority.
Perhaps it's intimidation, as you say. They think that if we can beat hard enough, if we can beat hard enough and bring enough firepower, just like the United States thinking, if we can beat hard enough, we can finally intimidate this Arab nation to come around and to become compliant to our needs and interests and become good client states like those that have lined up in a sort of quasi-allied status with them?
You know, up to now, because of this mentality on the part of Israel, namely by military and nuclear power, they can force their will and their policy on the Arabs, but economically they are not viable. You know, Israel really lives at the donations and contribution of the United States government as well as the population. And we have an example in the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union is a superpower in the sense that it has so many nuclear and hydrogen bombs, but we see now they are appealing to the rest of the world to provide them with food in order to avoid starvation.
Yes, right.
And I believe this would be also the destiny of the Israelis if they continue their aggressive policy against the Arabs.
We also, in our own country, have a savings and loan. We have the major banks. We have had a recessionary. Everyone's talking about recession. There are even some people who are saying we may be heading for a deep recession here. I mean, a deep depression here in the United States. We have economic difficulties that we could be confronting this economy here, and it might be this is an attempt to try and put away to point to a foreign problem in order to get away from the domestic problems.
Well, it's amazing how
and we allow homelessness and the injustice to go on in our
It's
society.
amazing how the United States managed to miss the peace dividends because of the end of the Cold War by creating another artificial crisis in the Gulf. But I hope eventually, as I mentioned, that reason and sanity would prevail, and negotiation, genuine negotiation and dialogue would be conducted, and the whole crisis would be over behind us.
Okay, this one last word. This is December 13, 1990. Are you optimistic, pessimistic? What do you think is the likely outcome of events over the next week or two, 3, 4, as we begin to look ahead? Do you think we can find a way out of this, or do you think there's going to be
I think, you see, unfortunately, up to now, everyone talking between whether sanction or use of force should be applied. We believe the only viable, really, solution is a dialogue and negotiation. And eventually, I believe everyone had to realize that and would accept that.
And that would be to the interest of all, so that some of the some of the just causes, as it were, that your country does, in fact, I was trying to stress the fact they do represent, in a very real sense, just cause. And it would be good for us to understand much of the fact, rather than just accept blindly the demonizing that's been trying to be done on the part of many of the people responsible for our strategy here in the United States. And happy to be able to help share some of that fact, particularly the progressive nature of your country. There's much more we could talk about, but I know you're on a busy schedule. May I just wish you all the very, very best, and to thank you very much for coming in, and to remind you in the cable audience, it's been your pleasure to have the perceptions in again of the ambassador of Iraq to the United Nations, Dr. Amir Anbari. Happy to have been able to bring you his perceptions. There will be more coming up in the same general topic area momentarily. We ask you to stay tuned. That's it for this section. Once again, Dr. Anbari, welcome. Thank you very much for coming in, and all the best to you and your people in these crucial days that lie.
Thank you. So good of you.
Not at all. My pleasure. Please stay tuned. We're coming right back.
In the cities we stare at the things that were there and no longer are, and in our hearts here we are again, in the calm before the storm.
Welcome very, very much to this segment of Conversations, where we're pleased to welcome to the program two gentlemen who can talk here in the actual eve of this momentous January 15th, actually taping now on January 15th. I'd like to introduce the two guests and talk about some of the implications of events in the Gulf now. And if I may, on my far left is Al-Amin Latif. He is the Amman, the chairman of the Council of Imams in New York. And Imam Al-Amin, welcome very, very much to Conversations.
Thank you.
And on my immediate left is Zaire Uddin. He is the editor-in-chief of the magazine called the Message International. And Zaire, welcome very, very much to Conversations.
My pleasure.
Fateful day in which you and I sit and talk. It's actually taping now on January 15th. Midnight tonight is the deadline. I am worried deeper as I can ever remember worrying. How do you feel now yourself? Are you worried, and are you, what is your general sense now? Particularly, we want to see this from an Islamic perspective.
Being a Muslim and citizen of U.S. and this great nation, I am also very worried and very scared due to the sword of war is hanging on our shoulder, on our head. And if this is started as presume is going to start after midnight, then it's a big calamity on the humanity, because we have over 1 million forces on each side, and there is a lot of ammunition, it's a nerve gas, and the chemicals, weapons are available. So I think it's a big, drastic destruction for the humanity.
It seems almost, doesn't it, as though it's like I feel like it's a Greek tragedy of some sort you see being worked out here. We're part of a chorus of trying to do opposition to this, trying to cause this calamitous event not to occur. You would, and again, Mom, maybe you could come in here now. Who is it that is being served by this? Whose interests are really being served, or how did this come about? Maybe briefly, and we do want to take. We got 68 million people of Muslim persuasion in the United States, growing. We have 1.2 billion on a world scale.
Yeah.
We want to take an Islamic perspective. How, in your estimation, did this come about, and who's being served by this, and how are we to understand this?
Yeah, I think, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, in the name of Allah, the Beneficent and Merciful. I think it's a very sad situation. And when I look at it, we live we are like savages in a civilized world. We profess to be so civilized. With the buildup of all the weapons of war and destruction, and again, it's something for us to deeply reflect upon. In terms of whose interests, it's obvious to me that whose interest this will benefit is those powers to be, namely the United States. They seem to be spearheading this whole scenario, and it's about money and it's about power. Israel, of course, stand to benefit tremendously, because again, they are the leaders, or they style themselves or look at themselves as the leaders in the Middle East, and that's in the interest of the United States. This is why they've been supporting them so strongly for the last 4 to 5 decades with the establishment of the Israeli state. So again, Saddam Hussein is a threat to them. And so if they can diffuse him and bring him down, then they'll have the kind of control and the kind of leadership and the power that they need to maintain, you know, their interest and their existence. So
yeah, we have terms for the past. Of course, in Pakistan and other countries would have been familiar with the colonial past, of the British boot of colonialism that so much of the peoples in the third world have suffered under and so forth. They have to be familiar with that. We have terms we've used out of other kinds of ideologies and so forth, just imperialism and other kinds of the strong, even from the days of Rome and other things, that Mr. Bush, when he talks about his new world order that he wants to impose in a certain sense, one wonders if it isn't that he's talking about imposing a hegemonic control of the world, almost, again, to use these words, Ramsey Clark has said, it's a classic case of colonialism. We're going to seize the oil resources with compliant local government, and it's in a sense a colonial experience. You must have, with your Pakistani background and your third world contact and empathy for that, must appreciate it in these terms, no?
Exactly.
And don't you think a great deal of the world must, and specifically, don't you think a great deal of the Arab and the Islamic world must perceive it that way?
Exactly, that's what it is. We used to have British imperialism in the late 40s, and before that, after the Second World War, Russia became one of the so-called superpower. On the other hand, in the West, US became one of superpower. Now the Russia is almost gone. But now US government think they are the champion of the world and they can dictate to any third world, so-called third world nation, whatever they want to. And to tell you the truth, I think this is totally wrong. And it's, if the war starts after this midnight, and I think it is an immoral war, and it's unjustifiable. As Imam mentioned, I think this is the vested interest of oil companies and the defense industry, and also the Jewish lobby, who is working hard to infiltrate this and this to have this war, so this way they can be the whole master of the Middle East region.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think this is not in favor of US, and if there is war, and that war should be on the poverty, that war should be against the homelessness, that war should be waged against the people who are lacking the Medicare, so on and so forth. We have so many problems in the society, the drugs problem, the crime problem. We should wage a real war against these problems, not to go overseas and have this kind of useless war and to spend so much billions of dollars, which is our taxpayer money. And that we have to answer those questions.
Yeah, I know. We want to talk about the worldwide Islamic reaction to this, but first of all, I want to make the point. You're both here, American Islamic people, and there are Arab Americans and so forth. There's been a great deal of discrimination directed against certainly the Arab community, a great deal of scapegoating and dehumanizing attempts against the Arabs, whether that was from whatever result within the media images and so forth. But you're an American, and you're taking exception to this, as many Americans are, is that it's just against the interests of our American society as good, loyal Americans and so forth. That's one issue. At the other, you'll be aware that many of the American people, perhaps simple-mindedly and so forth, or supporters of Israel, or supporters of the American position and so forth, and war gets irrational. I wonder if you've had any, or are you fearful of there being any increased discrimination and increased scapegoating directed at you in this wartime fervor that's developing? Do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah. As American people of Islamic faith, could you address yourself to that just for a moment? And how do we protect? How can we help protect you? How are you help protecting yourselves?
Again, I think I just received the call yesterday informing me that a bomb was found in one of the mosques in San Diego, California. You know, so again, this is typical of what happens. Again, people, especially when America or any country goes to war with another country, you know, the whole sense of patriotism has a tendency to rise, you know, to come to surface, and that's what you're going to experience. You know, so surely not just Arabs, will become the scapegoats, but just all Muslims, period.
Yeah,
you know,
the Muslims.
and Muslim, period. You know, and again, you know, people try to make this an Arab issue, but it's not an Arab issue. It's a Muslim issue. It's an Islamic issue. So again, it's not so much a fearing. I mean, this is just a reality that we see coming. That kind of backlash.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's going to get a lot worse, maybe perhaps in this wartime furor, or you have to guard against that sort of thing.
But the other dynamic to it is, again, you know, we do all we can do by going public, by having dialogue and communicating and talking to people and letting people know our point of view and how we feel about this. But the other dynamic to it is that, again, you know, God Almighty, you know, we have faith. We're people of faith, and we believe, you know, in the unseen power, you know, of the Creator. You know, again, and as you know, the dynamic that we don't see is how He is operating in all of this. And what I see, or what we see from the Islamic perspective, is there's a tradition of the Prophet Muhammad where he said there are 3 grave sins that man can commit. He said one is to associate a partner with him, to worship gods along with God. One. The second is to feel secure in one's position and never feeling any fear of the plan and the powers of God Almighty Allah. And third is to despair of the mercy of God. So you know, if I wish to say anything to the powers that be, whoever they are, you know, namely America or United States or the government, you know, who feel so secure in their weaponry, you know, in their technology. You see what I'm saying? That again, the unseen power, you know, or the unseen hand of God will certainly be at work. And that's a reminder for people in power to reflect. For the people of faith, you know, we are reminded not to despair in this dismal, you know, hour or situation. So we have to hope for the best, but at the same time, we should take warning. Because we have instances, again, the kind of arrogance that you see being manifest on both sides, but particularly the U.S.
Because they're the strongest.
Exactly. I mean, they're the strongest. Like Pharaoh. There's a scenario in the Quran, which is the book of guidance for the Muslims that were revealed to the Prophet Muhammad, where there's Pharaoh and all of his might. He's in all of his power. He was called the Lord of Stakes, even. You see? And in his pursuit of Moses, who was like a nobody. You see? And God Almighty, you know, overwhelmed him and his whole army and his whole nation because of their arrogance and their being secure in their power. No one should feel secure in this situation.
That's really an interesting point. If I may to bring it around, maybe is that what is it is that while they may feel that with all of their firepower, their high technology, and it's going to be a massacre and all the power on their side and so forth. But what is likely to be if they do have this, if they do make this massive attack, if they try to hit? It's rather like apartheid, trying to attack them, or they're trying to break bones in Palestine, or they're trying to, wherever the person with the stick and with the great power tries to do this. But what do you predict, or what can we predict? If they make this strike, they bring great devastation and so forth. What is likely to be the reaction worldwide of, let's say, the Arab and the Islamic peoples, and then touch a little bit upon that, if you might, of the lingering anti-American or Western feeling there might be among the relatives of the 2.5 million Vietnamese people that were killed and other peoples in the third and developing world. I wonder just what is your sense about what the likely reaction to this might be, maybe even looking out a few months. Is it likely to be a pyrrhic victory, or what? How do you see it?
I think victory or not victory, but it will, first, number one is a very great tragedy to the humanity. It's a great loss of the human beings, whether it is Iraqis or it's Americans or European or you name it. So it's a great loss of human life, useless.
So much civilian life.
Exactly. Number two, I think it is against U.S. interest, because once this war is going to start, the whole Muslim nations of 46 nations, I think, is going to be alienated from our policies, our government, our U.S. policies.
Even those who have been aligned with us?
I think they're going to break down right after once the war starts.
Because the masses are against that.
Against the...
By and large. The masses of the Islamic people are against.
And not only that, see, in Saudi Arabia, it's not any other country. It is the sacred place for the over 1 billion Muslims. If any rocket falls in any sacred place like Mecca and Medina. So this will be a very emotional backlash from the Muslim masses, and it will very great anger going to come out from the Muslim masses. And so this will alienate the US from the Muslim 46 Muslim countries. So our interest, the US government interest, lies in the resolving this issue peacefully by negotiating and by having the dialogue, and also solving all the problems in the region, like the Palestine problem we have. And to begin with, this Kuwait problem was a Muslim and Arab problem, and this could have resolved by the OIC, this Organization of Islamic Countries, and the Arab League. They were in a position to resolve this problem, but the US...
But you and I, if I may, you and I are here talking in the afternoon of the 15th, and all diplomatic measures seem to have broken down. We are all sitting and waiting for the bombs to be released anytime after midnight tonight. And once the fat's in the fire is going to be, I guess what I was trying to get at is what is likely to be the reaction to that. I mean, on the assumption, I guess, that it looks like that's going to be what's going to be happening.
I, as Brother Zahir has said, again, see, you can't predict the emotions of people, you know, who share the same kind of belief system. And I think, again, this is why many Muslim countries have already, you know, initially they came to side with America, initially because of this fear of Saudi Arabia being attacked.
Defensively.
Exactly. And they stated from the outset that they have no intentions, even though they want Kuwait, and they want Iraq to pull back out of Kuwait. They're in agreement with the United States on that, and United States allies.
But this making war is another matter.
But to attack Iraq,
in such a short time,
the Muslim countries, I don't feel, are going to accept that. They're not going to be involved in that. In other words, the United States and some of its allies may be left to do that by themselves, and that's where you're going to have the backlash. That's where you're going to have the emotion
why
of the Muslims.
if we may, and it's our ignorance that we are ignorant here in the United States, ignorant onto the point of actually scapegoating and dehumanizing and all kinds of media campaigns directed against Arabs and Islamic people. So we're ignorant. But how do we come to understand? The fact that these people, that these governments have sided with us and are continuing to do it? The governments have. Some of these governments have. Mr. Mubarak, Mr. Assad, a strange collection of people.
It's not even the
but do you
governments,
feel those alliances are going to fall apart in the aftermath of the
Sure
attack?
they will. Because the people.
Could you see governments fall?
Sure. The people.
Could you see Mubarak fall?
The people.
And
People
could you
go-
see a mass uprising?
Sure.
That's a good
Now, and
possibility.
is there any point in there being a mass rising if the man's got all the power? If the leadership has all the power, is it going to make a difference? And why isn't there that mass uprising now? In the days before the attack, why hasn't there been a mass uprising in Syria or in Egypt or in some of these other countries where this is likely to happen after the fact of the attack?
Because these are basically non-democratic police states. The masses like to love peace, they like to have Islam in their daily life.
It's absolutely
but unfortunately, the leadership, whether it is Egyptian leadership or Syrian leadership or Iraqi leadership, they are the not democratic elected leadership. They are not reflecting what masses really like to have in their daily life. So people, Muslims really love peace, and that's what Islam stands for. Islam means peace, and the Muslims love peace in their society, in their daily life. But unfortunately, the leadership of the Muslim nations are not reflecting that wishes and the goodness of that religion.
And out of this upheaval, there might be a mass uprising?
I think right now in various Muslim countries.
In the name of a broad-based mass justice or something?
Right now, I'm sure that in the Muslim countries, you know, Muslims are uprising or organizing themselves right now, but we don't see that because, again, in the various countries, the news that comes out is always limited. The people have been very dissatisfied for many, many years because of the conditions of their country. So the leadership has long lost their credibility for the most part. And this year, this Gulf crisis has only increased, you know, in terms of the minds of those active people, those conscious Muslims who want to see a change in their various societies.
They want to see a change in society.
Certainly they do. So they're not in support of what the leadership is involved in or doing. And this is why the leadership are making themselves very, very clear that they have no intention to attack Iraq. You see what I'm saying? So the United States is going to be left by themselves to do that.
We would do much better to be able to understand the masses, as it were, the people of that Islamic world than we do. And I really am sorry. On your part, your magazine is doing, and both your work is doing a great deal to help to try to educate us. We'll try in our small way here. It's important we understand that 1 out of every 5 million people in the world of this Islamic persuasion, which we do have no understanding of. I wonder if I could ask you quickly what your feeling is in terms of Iran and the position that Iran is likely to take in the case of the attack. I don't know. I don't want to put you on the spot or anything of that sort, but they had been bloody in conflict. And what is Iran's position likely to be if and as the war breaks out?
I think Iran will go in favor of the Muslim masses all over the world. I think that's my opinion. And so far it is neutral, and it is against the American involvement in the Persian Gulf. And I think it's going to go with the Muslim masses.
And when we say go with the Muslim masses, what form would that take? What are we talking about specifically? People in the street? Governments overthrown? UN action? Does this stretch from Indonesia to Mauritania? What is the dimension of this? And also this other question, if I could, does it spill out into any of the non-Muslims, other third world people who've been aggrieved, as it were, by hegemonic Western materialistic imperialism in the past? Could it be, and then could it not only get through back? We've got 1 million people in the United States in prisons now. 1 out of every 250 people. We lead the whole rest of the world in terms of that. I mean, some of the other people who feel aggrieved and they're sleeping on the streets in this country, could there be a mass-based reaction to the narrow leadership that controls assets in the capitalist world as we also, one last dimension, that is we're coming into a deep economic recession or maybe on into a depression. I wonder, could this have massive implications in terms of a worldwide based class reaction to the narrow base of leadership that's going to benefit by this bombardment and more or less runs the American and world economy?
I think Allah, only Allah knows best how it's going to, you know, how it's going to happen. Allah knows best. Only God knows, you know, how it's going to affect, how people on different levels in the different countries are going to react. We feel it's going to happen. Well, you know, the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, you show how this thing affects us, you know, on many different ways, but it hits our faith. The Prophet, peace be upon him, he said that the believers, meaning the Muslim people, the believers is like one body. When the eye aches, the whole body aches. Or when the head aches, the whole body aches. You see? So again, it's not a matter of when you say how Iran is going to act. Again, this is what Brother Zahir is saying. You know, the people, the Muslims. You see? You know, even Saddam is insignificant. It's the people. It is the people. You know, if Muslims, you know, don't have a whole lot of sympathy, don't have no sympathy at all with Saddam, you see. But what their concern is the Muslim people in Iraq. So when bombs start falling on women and children and babies, you know, that's going to touch up a reaction, you understand, that will have far-reaching effects.
Much less if it hits any of the holy places. Any of those places are violated, the Hajj can't happen, and I mean, all these things are...
Well, we're not even looking at
and it's important for us. We're so materialistic, so secular, so materialistic in both the communist world and the Western world. We don't understand sufficiently enough the depth of the spiritual quality of the psychology and the thinking and the feeling of the people within the Islamic world.
Exactly.
You know, and that's very important that we understand that that's a very, very important part of what makes up the psyche of the people of Islamic faith. And it's virtually universal throughout that wide area of the geography. No more important question is how that can... It's a new dialectic in a certain sense against this power. I asked you, Zahir, we don't have much time left. Do you see the possibility of there being this mass-based reaction to this leadership class that has ultimately is behind the ordering of our young men and women into going into battle and so forth? Or do you see a reaction on a large scale that could have real geopolitical meaning?
That's as Imam said, it's Allah knows best what's going to happen in the future. But if this war going to continue for a longer period, and it's I think it's a very much big tragedy for the humanity. But I expect it's going to come out from this tragedy something good for the humanity, and this mass is going to brought new order of world or order of life, maybe in a good sense. I mean, maybe the Bush is using for his own sake, but I think it's maybe something going to come up with good in the favor of the humanity. Maybe we're going to see real peace and tranquility in the society all over the world. Maybe you're going to live and live other people in harmony and in peace.
In the aftermath.
In the aftermath.
Yeah, well, it's important for Americans to understand that equity, in the sense of equity among the peoples of the faith and to all of the world, is intrinsic to the Islamic view. I think we not understand that sufficiently enough. We have a very wealthy first world, North America, Germany, Japan. We have a third world that is doing very badly in relative terms to the first. The Islamic belt, the belt of Islamic humanity from Mauritania to Indonesia, could be an intervening element between them, particularly since that first world has such dependence upon the oil that is there in the Persian Gulf. So it might be that this is an intervening force between those two that could bring about a just and
we can have a just
world.
System in the world. That's what we're lacking in.
But there needs to be some dialectic mediation brought against the arrogance and the power of Pharaoh, as you put it, who is living in the White House right now. And you feel like that now. We only got a couple minutes.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Not only that, but there should be some dialogue, you know, with the Muslim countries too, you know, because again, most of the Muslim countries, the leaders in the Muslim country do not represent the Muslims. Make no mistake about it. And this is why you'll have the problem of the masses of the Muslims on that level, because you know they're in opposition to their leadership.
Well, in a very real sense, that probably represents the problem of the world, because there are many countries where the leadership does not, including perhaps even this one, in very large real terms for much of the people. There needs to be some understanding of all of that. I would like to suggest that this war is helping to bring those things, this confrontation, bring those things into focus. Your magazine, The Message International, will let people know about it. And your work and the Council of the Mosques have been doing a great deal toward helping to understand those things. And all we can do say, it is in the hands of Allah now, as we sit and wait 5 or 6 hours before the deadline to events, and we wanted to get at the repercussions of this. And if I may, I'd like to once again remind you in the audience, it's been your pleasure on my far left to have the perceptions of Imam Ali Min Al-Latif, who is the chairman of the Council of Imams here in New York, and on my immediate left is Zahir Uddin, who is the editor-in-chief of the very interesting magazine, The Message International. Thank you, gentlemen, very much for coming in. It's a great pleasure.
Nice to see you.
Peace be upon you.
Peace be upon you.
We on Conversations would like to invite you to tune in again next week. We'll be coming back again next week, but that's it for this particular segment. Gentlemen, once again, thank you very much indeed. On this fateful day, we wish you good night, and by the time this is aired, we'll perhaps be in the throes of war. Very scary time. Thank you very much for coming in and sharing it with us. Good night. We'll see you next week.
There was a time when ignorance made our innocence strong. There was a time when we all thought we could do no wrong. There was a time so long ago. There was a time, but here we are in the calm before the storm. While the orchestra plays, they build barricades to help close the door. While the musicians